Well, my grandmother did the right things when I was young, so she put me on the straight and narrow.
Sounds boring, but okay. I'm sure you find excitement though.
Always playing games, always having fun, that kind of stuff. Do you mind if I record our conversation for posterity?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So, when I was talking with Jeff Berry, he had mentioned that you'd be one of the best guys to talk to about Blackmoor and its legacy for us because you were the first guy there. And my understanding is you were one of the first guys to actually reach the highest level in the game. And then you took over after Arneson's passing. So I've got a couple of preliminary questions that I want to ask you, and then we just kind of see where things go from there. Now, when it comes to the way in which Arneson ran the game, um, you guys didn't really see the rules or even your character sheets or your records. Now, the closest thing I've been able to find in that time period that comes decently close to how Arneson was doing that was how Tony Bath and Donald Featherstone were playing in the Hyboria campaign in England. Did you read the Wargamers newsletter or any other books like Featherstone's War Games from 1962?
I did not. Yeah.
Okay.
I the guys had access to all of this stuff
Mm-hmm.
and you know, they even I think Arneson at least went to England and I'm not sure when.
Yeah.
Probably Wesley had access to it. So it's the thing is that I tell everyone that Blackmore evolved, and
Mm-hmm.
actually it evolved before it existed. So yeah, it could be that they knew about Tony Bath's books. I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty sure that Wesley did before he did. Um, what is that called? Brownstein.
Yes.
Don't quote me on that
Mm-hmm.
because I have no real information. But yeah, a lot of ideas came out of England also. But it's not just that. Um, our group, um, at least for the time, and maybe for now also, was rather unique. Um, it's, I mean, a lot of stuff I learned later. I had no clue at the time. I was just a teenage boy who had found a group of friends who had the same hobby that I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea what was going on with any of them, or why, or how it happened. But later on, I learned a lot. And the thing is that our group was really large, and we weren't the only wargaming group in the Twin Cities. And the groups mostly knew each other. And as a matter of fact, guys would game with one group and then go game with another group.
Mm-hmm.
But our particular group, we must have had at least 2 dozen guys who gamed in the group all the time, and probably a couple dozen more that would kind of drift in and out of the group depending on what we were doing or anything. And it was a very creative group, I guess, is what I was really coming to, because this was at a time when war games were just. Now I'm talking, of course, modern wargaming. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
war games have been around for a long time. You've got. Uh, I can't even think of the names.
Are you thinking Strategos and Kriegspiel, that kind of stuff?
Even earlier than that,
Mm-hmm.
Fletcher Pratt. You've got Little Soldiers came
Mm-hmm.
out of England. All kinds of games. But yeah, we had. Now, in my case, and Wesley at least says the same thing, and probably most of the gamers would say the same thing, that we got into gaming really, really young. I learned chess and checkers when this was around 1955.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, I got into a bunch of other games, all the usual cheesy, Risk, Monopoly. Um, as far as wargaming companies go, there weren't really many around at the time. It wasn't until Avalon Hill that you really get into, well, maybe earlier than that, Rand or some of the others, but Avalon Hill was really the first I remember. So um, in our group, um, we played all those games,
Hmm.
and you can only play them so many times before they become very predictable. Not really boring, but predictable. I mean, you had the same moves that you would do over and over because they were the most efficient, the
Right.
ones that usually would lead to winning. So the guys came up with their own games. And we had a lot of games that came out of that group, even several that were published, but there were a lot more that were never published. And we did a lot of campaigning. That is, guys would come up with rules for a campaign. World War One, naval, which is one that I ran. We had oh, all kinds of campaigns, but the major one, the one that everyone has heard about, is the Napoleonics. And there was a lot of things that the guys were very inventive. They came up with a lot of extras in it. It wasn't just because it was a way to win, it was a way of being inventive.
Hmm.
And you may have heard about the royal families that guys came up with, on the theory that, well, historically, there was royalty back then, and his, for centuries, they had been forming alliances by marrying off um, daughters to sons, that kind of thing. And it wasn't enough for them to cement an alliance by doing that in the campaign, our campaign. Um, they would come up with things like, well, my daughter's beautiful. And you see here the statistics. And this was kind of a start in, um, how do I want to describe this? In the way that people had player characters.
Sure.
And it went even further than that because, you know, of course, the Napoleonics came out of Tata, you heard about that, right?
Yes, I've watched the Blackmoor documentary numerous times, and I've read at least some of Totten myself. It's something else.
Right. Well, that was made to be to train officers in
Hmm.
how to fight battles and wars. So it didn't have all these extras that we ended up putting into our Napoleonics campaign with, you know, I'm not sure. Maybe Totten has it. I've never read Totten, so I don't know. But there are things like you have, um, matter of fact, this is probably in there. You have morale,
Yes.
because historically troops broke. You did not fight to the death unless it's Tanai and you're surrounded and you have no choice but to
Hmm.
die.
Hmm.
So troops would break. And it would make a difference as to who were the generals, who were the colonels, that kind of thing. And that kind of got into the campaign also, in that, like, for instance, I had one battle. Um, this will show you how inexperienced I was. I led a small force of Italian troops into a vineyard where I was ambushed by the French.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't really worried about it at the time because I thought that grapes grew on trees.
Oh.
Um, it was a surprise to me that no, they grow on vines and they're only about 3 feet high.
Hmm.
And so when I was ambushed in that and they started shooting up my units, I realized I was in trouble. And so I had one regiment stay while the rest of them retreated. And the thing is that um, people have interesting relationships with dice. My relationship is I roll a lot of low numbers. This can be really advantageous in the Napoleonics when you're rolling for morale because you want to roll low numbers. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what happened with this regiment. I rolled a lot of low numbers. So the unit was immediately promoted by David Arneson, who was running the campaign, to veteran unit. And the colonel, more importantly, was promoted to one who adds a lot to the morale of a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of that kind of thing. So you see, these things then are showing up in Blackmoor, where you have um, player characters who are novices, those that are veterans, that kind of thing. And David came up with this idea of, um, promotion through levels
Mm-hmm.
in order to show this because then they became more able to do things. And we had that kind of thing going on all the time. So when it came to Blackmoor, um, David was drawing on a, shall we say, encyclopedia of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Probably some came from England, some came from campaigns we had already been running. Uh, Games that were invented by some of the guys in the group. And of course, one of the biggest influences, I think, on Blackmoor was Brownstone, Dwayne
Yes, Dwayne
Jenkins. You've
Jenkins.
heard of
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Brownstone
Yeah.
because that introduced another idea, because like in Brownstein, it's one and done. You play a game, it's done, you move on. If you play another game, it has nothing to do with the one before. Whereas Brownstone had the idea of kind of like what we're already doing in Napoleonics. What happens in one game affects what happens in the next game.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of things that were going on then. And sorry, Blackmoor evolved even after David invented it. So there are a lot of things that were showing up in the game, and a lot of it had to do with the guys who were playing in the game,
Mm-hmm.
with ideas they came up with. David may or may not have already decided that that would be in the game. I do not know. I never asked him about it because it was so organic,
Yeah.
the things that were happening. No one ever questioned it. Peter Gaylord wanted to be a wizard, so he was a wizard. And he just kind of invented things that as it went along, and we used a lot of, there were a lot of guys that were into modeling and especially these railroad
Mm-hmm.
engines and stuff, and terrain, of course. And so we used a lot of that in the gaming. Not all the time. I don't even remember offhand. But, things like we had this one tree, HO scale probably, that probably was meant to be oranges in the tree. The thing is that they kept falling off the tree. And it became rather tedious putting them back on.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter said, no, 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 no. These are magic berries. I'm taking those. I'm using those in my magic.
I just came up with that on the
Um,
spot.
yeah, yeah. And the guys were incredibly creative, regardless of whether they created a game, created a campaign, were playing it. Last, like Dwayne Jenkins was a big fan of Dark Shadows, so of course we had
Mm-hmm.
to have vampires.
Well, good.
Um,
I've
you
watched a
know,
little bit of that show myself.
yeah. So it's all kinds of things went into it. And I'm not even aware of most of it. Blackmore was actually a campaign,
Mm-hmm.
um, beyond just guys going out adventuring. They did not become involved in any of that.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I was noted for not really becoming too involved in campaigns. It kind of depended. because the guys were really into miniatures, and I'm not really into miniatures myself. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
board gamer. Starting with chess and checkers and parcheesi and risk. Um, you've got definite areas on a board. I really loved it when Avalon Hill came out. I even liked Tactics 2, which was squares.
Yeah.
But I loved hexes, and I still do. And I'm not into miniatures. When they came out with this, like, don't give up the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Napoleonics is a better example. You've got all these figures on basically brown butcher paper that was taped together with terrain all scribbled on it, and you move the guys a certain number of inches, which is not exact enough for me. I'm very obsessive compulsive. So, then they can shoot. Their frontage for shooting could be up to 15 degrees off of the front.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of inexact to me. I'm not really into that. And so when Blackmoor was being done, there's no hexes in Blackmoor. And so I wasn't really interested in it. They had a lot of stuff going on, about 99% of which I'm not aware of, or I was not at the time. I've learned about all of this since then because of people like Dan Boggs and some of the others who've done excellent work in
Mm-hmm.
investigating and cataloging and writing down for posterity what all happened in Blackmoor. Um, my thing was just adventuring. That was all I was really interested in, which was interesting because I never played Brownstein. It never interested me. Brownstone, I remember showing up for one or two games of Brownstone. I probably never even participated in it. I just watched what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I had a character in it, but I didn't last long in it. And my start in Blackmoor, of course, everyone knows about the troll,
Yes.
trolling my character.
Mm-hmm.
And no, that was actually, David had explained to me I'm play testing rules to see if I can use them.
Right.
So at the end of that game, I told him what I thought about the rules, and he agreed with me. He said, no, these rules are not going to work for what I want. And he came up with his own. And I doubt this has something to do with this legend of how, what is that game that Gygax came up with the other guy?
You're talking about
People,
chainmail with Jeff Perrin.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
chainmail. Everyone says, well, chainmail was the basis of the rules for Blackmail. It was not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was what David was trying, chainmail rules to see if they work, and it was not. He came up with other things, and if anything, the rules he came up with, as far as combat especially, remind me more of this naval game that we played, a Civil War naval game, which explains why Armor Class Zero is the best. If you want to get into it, I'll explain it to you. But
Yeah, that'd actually be
anyway,
great because uh, I do like chainmail myself. I've got some plans on playing some games of it, but figuring out what Arneson used, didn't use, and went on from. Because you're talking about the Ironclads game, right?
I don't remember the name of the game. I
Mm-hmm.
do remember we used to go down to a guy's house in South Minneapolis. His name was Frank something. I've had his last name told me and I just can't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
He had an Atari computer. And remember, this was back in the days at the very beginning of computers that
Mm-hmm.
weren't filling a room. He had an Atari computer that he loaded with a program that he probably came up with himself that was useful for this game because this game, um, you had to specify, like when you're shooting, you specified what gun it was what the distance was to the target, what the angle was to the target, and then you looked at the target as to whether it had any kind of armor. That is, did it have cotton bales? Was it an ironclad? Was it, a tin clad? Was it just wood? Where does the shot hit on it? Does it actually hit any of this armor that it has? If
Hmm.
it does it penetrate? He loaded all that into the Atari computer because otherwise the game just bogged down too long. And it really made for a fun game. Well, the thing is, this game had this thing then about the armor. You had to know what the armor was on a ship, all the way from zero, which was basically just like an open rowboat or maybe just a wooden ship, and it would go up from there all the way up to a full ironclad like the Monitor.
Hmm.
And so the scale went from zero on up. And since you're starting the basic in the game is just a regular ship from 1860, a wooden ship, it made sense to label that as Armor Class Zero. Although I'm not sure they used the term Armor Class. Maybe they did. And then it went up from there depending on what you add on it. And I, to this day, I think that's why David used armor classes with zero being, um, that doesn't make any sense though, come to think of it. But armor class zero being the fully armored. So maybe that's what he started with in the naval game. I don't know. But it just reminded me so much of that naval game,
Yeah.
so to this day, I think that's where he came up with all of this as far as combat goes. And then, of course, there's the personalities that are involved. You've got people in the Napoleonics game actually rolling up personalities for each of their characters in the royal family. So that's an obvious start for where you roll up your abilities
Hmm.
within, and we played other games also. And I don't know the time scale here. I could look it up. You're better off looking it up yourself. But
That's fine. I don't know if Jeff had mentioned it, but I'm actually writing a book on D&D's history, so I've got a pretty decent timeline at this stage about when
okay,
things
well, I'm
happened.
talking about a timeline with other games that were around at the time.
Hmm.
Like there's this French um, French period game where you duel, and so you had to have abilities there. And I don't know if that came along before Blackmoor or after.
Hmm.
So we had access to all these games, and I can't be sure as to what came from other games, what came from a creator's imagination, or anything like that. Um, so it's, you know, I do tend to ramble, don't I?
Well, I'm finding interesting things, so I'm going to let you ramble some more. Let me go ahead and bring up something that I always find interesting whenever I talk with any guys from the Twin Cities area who created the hobby. Everybody has historical interests. Everybody wants to get together persistently to play these different kinds of games. But the kinds of gamers who play role playing games today, they don't really read their books. They just expect to be taken along, and they don't seem to participate all that well in the game itself. So it's really neat to listen to you talk to about how everybody's coming up with ideas, how they then try to integrate those into other games. And you wind up having, as you're saying, a campaign where you've got someone like yourself who doesn't really want to participate in the larger scale stuff, but more on the smaller adventure scale. So I
Yeah.
find that really interesting.
Yeah, and we still came up with ideas on that too,
Hmm.
And when I decided to get back into Blackman, I don't know if you've heard this story, but by that time, the other guys were like level 3 and level 4.
Hmm.
And um, it was easily recognized that David rewards creativity and initiative. And one way he did that was by, if now we had the dungeon at the time, and the guys liked going down into the dungeon because you could find cool stuff there. Well, they had pretty much cleared out the first level and maybe the second level, and the further down you go, the cooler the stuff you find, but the more danger there was.
Hmm.
And I always described to people, I compared myself to the red shirts in the original Star Trek. Their only purpose was to die, right?
Hmm.
And that was my only purpose. The expeditions, it seemed, because the guys went down where you find these bad things that would kill me right away. Now, part of it was my problem. And matter of fact, I'll skip ahead a couple sentences by saying that I went to David and told him that, okay, I've tried your game. I don't like it. I get nowhere in it. And David said, just the minute, Bob, we'll take care of that. He sat me down, and I don't know how long he did this with me. It seemed like hours
Hmm.
that he patiently taught me how to play Blackmoor. And the reason why I was having a problem in Blackmoor is because I am a very aggressive gamer. I always have been. I found that works great in things, not just chess, but in war games, board games,
Hmm.
anything. The more aggressive I am, the better I do because it throws off the other person. It doesn't work that way in Blackmoor, especially when you're only, up through level 4. What I was doing was drawing my sword and charging whatever it was, which of course would kill me right away.
Yep.
And he told me basically, that's for later. For now, you just survive. And so he got one or two of my characters up a level or two, and I immediately decided now I'm a big naval enthusiast. So is David, and I love the history. I love the games, anything to do with ships.
Hmm.
And so I knew about the Scandinavians at least, and I thought, all right, I'm not interested in dungeons. They're death traps. I like outdoor adventuring, which the guys were not. I mean, they, as part of the campaign, yes, but not for adventuring. They didn't go out and adventure outdoors. And I thought, well, I want to join the Scandinavians. And so I went up and joined the Scandinavians, and I had all kinds of fun with that. And this might have something to do with why David had to come up with rules for ships. What ships were there? How did people fight with them? That
Hmm.
kind of thing. And I found some rock eggs, maybe one of them, or maybe a chick. I raised it up until it was full grown. And then I flew around with that while I was part of the Scandinavians. And that might be why David came up with air rules. And I'm just one example and a very minor one because, as I said, Peter came up with the idea of being a wizard and using the berries. Dwayne came up with the vampires, and guys were coming up with stuff all the time. Now, this is something that they've been doing all along. They did this in the Napoleonics campaign, which really was the death of the Napoleonics campaign because David became tired of having to put up with guys coming up with these ideas all the time, and half the time they would pull them on David in the middle of a battle. It didn't work well there, but in
Hmm.
Blackmoor, it worked really well. So yeah, the imagination. I mean, that's what it was. You know, I tell guys all the time, we were just a bunch of kids having fun. It didn't matter what age we were still just a bunch of kids having fun. And that was the whole idea of it. And if you could come up with a great idea or try whatever you wanted to do, David was open to anything.
Hmm.
If it failed, you suffered the consequences, but we were aware of that. We were always willing to try. And one nice thing about it, at least when you're a lower level, is, well, if your character dies, you just start another one. And mind you, this is before video games,
Right.
where you lose a character, you just start another one. Yeah, we just start another one. Now, as we went up levels, it became more important for us to keep our character because we had an awful lot invested in that.
Hmm.
And this has a lot to do with why, like for instance, Greg Svensson was one of the very first gamers in Black, and he ended up one of his characters, the Great Svenny, we called him. As a matter of fact, a lot of the nicknames were bestowed by other people onto
Hmm.
our characters. The Great Svenny ended up being a very important character in the campaign and in adventuring. And um, Greg was very careful about where he used this character. He was one of the first to realize when we started out level one that you run away. This is a very smart survival strategy. This is not cowardice. This is living to fight another day.
Uh-huh.
And he was very careful with his character. Um, in very judicious in the way he used the character, especially in the campaign part. So he actually did a lot more. Like my character was the very first one to reach the highest level that David had,
Hmm.
but Greg's character could easily have leveled out long before my character did. And I think part of the reason why Greg was careful about that is because none of us had any idea of what would happen when we reached the highest level. It wasn't until I did that we found out that this is not necessarily a good thing. So, yeah, I don't know. Was I making a point that served your purpose?
Yes, because you're talking about how characters would interact with the different scales in the campaign,
Yes, yeah,
right?
and I was never really involved in the campaign, the Blackmore
Hmm.
campaign, so I had no clue what was going, as exemplified by what happened to my character that joined the Scandinavians. Have you heard that story?
Not particularly. I know they're based off of Arneson's own ancestors, I believe.
Well, no, what I'm talking about is the fact that Kurt Fry
Hmm.
had a wizard in the campaign, and he ended up having to leave the locale. He became very much persona non grata.
Oh no.
This character that is. And lo and behold, the character shows up in Scandaharia, where I am.
Hmm.
And he wants to go back to the Blackmoor area, not necessarily to Blackmoor itself, where he's not wanted, but I guess he was involved with the egg of food for someone. And so um, he wanted to get back there, but he had no way of getting back there. So he talked me into challenging the captain of the ship, and I won the duel. And then I sailed the ship back to Blackmore. This was all Kurt's idea, basically, because he wanted his player character to be back in that area. And that ended very badly. We had a tremendous amount of um, encounters on the way, which really winnowed down the crew. There weren't a whole lot left by the time I sailed into Blackmore Bay, and no one had told me about Gertie.
Oh no.
I had no clue. Well, maybe I'd heard about the dragon, but I had no clue that Gertie had had run-ins with Scandinavians before and hated them, and so Gertie destroyed the ship, killed most of the crew. There are only, I think, well, 4 survivors. Bert, myself, and a couple of the crew. Now, all this happened because I had no clue that Bert um, was on the run, and he just wanted to get back to that area, because I knew nothing about the campaign.
Yeah.
Talk
Oh
about
my.
being ignorant.
Mhm. So did you guys play quite frequently during the weeks? Um,
Probably, yeah, and we
okay.
probably played, well, at that time we were mostly um, college kids
Hmm.
or college dropouts. I was a college dropout. We had high schoolers that joined. Um, you know, so we played on the weekends for sure, and actually, some of us lived together. Um,
Hmm.
the apartment. There was an apartment in Riverside. You probably don't know the particular neighborhoods involved.
Oh
These
no.
were around the University of Minnesota. Um, Now, some of us were grown-ups, married, with their own houses, like Dan Nicholson. He lived down in Rochester. And other people were married also, like Bill Hoyt. And then, of course, most of the rest of us married later on. But in the beginning, we were what you would call footloose and fancy free, drifters even. Um, and John Snyder, I met him, if I remember correctly, because we both worked for parking at the University of Minnesota while we were students there. And he lived in an apartment that typical for that area was subdivided. That is, it had, I think, 3 bedrooms and a living room, and they put up rugs to block off part of the living room so that way we could have like 5 people live in the apartment. John was living with his brother John at the time and a couple other guys, Mike and, oh, I forget the name of the other guy. He was a really cool guy. I really, really like. He taught me how to play Go, and
Oh wow.
he did something that just amazed me at the time. Now, mind you, these were the old 50-pound TVs, no remotes or anything. You'd go up
Hmm.
and you turn the remote, or you turn the dial for the channel or for the sound.
Yeah.
And he hated commercials, and so what he did was he took a cord with a single button on one end, and he wired it into the TV. So every time a commercial came on, he could cut the sound. And then when the commercial was done, he hit the button again, and the sound came back on. So the creativity there, because you're talking college kids here.
Yeah, he created a
Uh,
mute button.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And these guys moved on as they graduated. Paul moved on, Mike moved on. This other guy, God, I wish I could remember his name. I really liked him. He moved on, and as they moved on, gamers moved in. I moved in.
Hmm.
Don't remember who all did. Greg Svensson, I think. I think David Arneson. I'm not
Hmm.
sure if this was in the apartment or the house later. But we were gaming in that room. This is where John invented what became published as, what was it, Space Probe, his space campaign.
Hmm.
I was there when he invented it, when he came up with ideas for it. He wanted a 4-dimensional star map. So he took a pan with high sides to it, a cake pan, and he poured um, some liquid that hardens. I forget what it is. And he took these little sparkles, these round colored things that you would put on like kid outfits for dancing, and he put those in there. And so there'd be at different levels. And he was very disappointed because there wasn't enough differentiation. And that's when he just drew it out on this huge board, and then he just put X, Y, and Z axes on it to differentiate where the stars were on the star map.
Mm-hmm.
So we did all of that stuff. We played all kinds of games there, and since it was our apartment, we could stay up as late as we wanted. It was not unusual for us to play all the way through the night into the day. And Dave McGarry wanted to move in with us, but no one wanted to move out, and it was crowded as it was. So he went
Yeah.
and rented a house in Dinkytown, and he talked everyone else into moving there. I always seemed to be the latecomer for everything, Johnny come lately, because I didn't want to move.
Yeah.
I was happy where I was, but everyone was moving out. I couldn't afford the apartment, so I moved into the house with them. And I don't know if you know, I have an artificial leg.
Oh.
And when we moved into the house, the guys agreed that this back room, which I don't know if it was meant to be the dining room, I think, that I could move into that room for my bedroom. But Dave McGarry set it up so that we paid according to how big the room was. And that was still a little too expensive for me. So David
Mm-hmm.
Arneson said he would move into the room with me, and we just put up a curtain between us. And so he and
Oh.
I shared the room. And Ross Maker moved into the house. Dave McGarry was there. John and Richard Snyder.
Wow.
Richard had actually moved in with us in the apartment. Um, uh, they lived there. I forget who else. Did I mention Greg Svensson? I think he lived there. It all gets confusing. We're talking about a period of time back in the early, well, 50 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we played all kinds of games. I remember Peter Gaylord helped us move in. Typical for these old houses. This house was built in 1900. I looked it up, and um, steep staircases going down to the basement, which were not really meant for anything other than maybe storing food or whatever. And Peter slipped on this steep staircase and really hurt his elbow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had a sling on for a long time after that. But, we set up in the basement um, so that we could have something set up permanently for us to game on. And we played these huge monster games. I loved them, starting with Anzio. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Avalon Hill game Anzio.
No, I'm not.
That game, yeah, that game had lots and lots of pieces, right down to regimental size, because you've got the special forces and everything. And I love that game. I used to uh, play these Avalon Hill games with my brother. My brother is 3 years younger than me, and he's the reason why I became so good at gaming, because my brother is whip smart. I
Mm-hmm.
tell you, our father was an engineer in the Marine Corps and in civilian life. I never took after that. My brother did. He became as good an engineer as our father. And I'd play these games with my brother, and he was so good, it was almost impossible for me to win a game with him. So I took to studying these games. And that taught me, first of all, you prepare. If you're going to play a battle, you prepare for the battle. And it's more than just setting up. You learn, you figure out the units, their capabilities, what they can do. You learn the terrain, you learn what the other side has.
Mm-hmm.
And, after Avalon Hill, you have, uh, I forget the name of the company, but they came out with these huge games like Drang Hosten, which is the entire eastern front of World War II, Germany's invasion of Russia. We're talking thousands and thousands. Yeah? Just a moment.
Yes, sir.
Thousands and thousands of pieces. I mean, we literally built our tables by taking a 4x8 sheet of plywood, constructing some framework and legs and putting that plywood on it. Now, David started out with, I have no memory of it, but it's famous now, this ping pong table, I guess, of his parents in his parents' basement. But when we moved into the house, we did this when Peter and his wife and family, Gail, moved into a house in Maplewood. Peter built a table for us to game on with games like Terrible Swift Sword.
Hmm.
That's the Battle of Gettysburg and During Nargostin, because you needed a table that big for all of this kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, we all gamed together and we gamed at each other's places. Of course, like I just mentioned, we gamed at Peter's house. That became very much a gathering place for everyone. But starting with the apartment, yeah, we gamed together. We gamed at David Arneson's parents' house. He was still living with his parents. We gamed at David Wesley's house. He was still living with his parents. Um, I'm not sure if we gamed at Dan Nicholson's house or not, because as I said, he lived in Rochester. I got an interesting story though about Dan. I
Okay.
don't know if you're aware that Dan worked for IBM.
Oh, wow.
IBM, um, their computer division mostly was in Rochester, Minnesota, and Dan worked for them there. And this was back in the late 60s, early 70s, and Dan I mean, he learned all the computer stuff, the hardware, the software, everything. And this is before Apple, before Microsoft, all of this stuff. I remember I thought of it as a road trip because it's like 90 miles to go down to Rochester. We went on a road trip down to visit Dan down there,
Hmm.
maybe to play a game, whatever it was. Um, and we went down into Dan's basement. He led us down there, and there was a card table set up with all kinds of electronic stuff on it. And I asked Dan what that was, and he said, it's a computer. And I laughed and I said, Dan, computers take entire rooms. And he told me, Bob, this is the future of computers. This is what everyone is going to have. I'm constructing a computer that you can have on a card table where you have all the advantages of a regular computer.
Well, he changed the world there. As I'm looking at my desktop and my laptop and my cell phone, which is just a little computer. My goodness.
Yeah. But a lot of ideas came out of areas other than with us.
Hmm.
As you pointed out, Bath in England, and there were gaming groups on the East Coast and West Coast also, from what I've heard, and maybe sprinkled throughout the country. I'm sure there are lots of guys that played games, especially, I think part of the reason why in Minneapolis, or the Twin Cities, I'll say, because St. Paul was pretty central to this gaming group I ended up joining.
Yeah.
Um, there were, we have winter. And if you're not into winter sports, that's a lot of time inside. And actually, as I said, I started gaming with my family.
Hmm.
My father, my grandfather, let's see, a grand uncle, my father and mother and brother, all gamed with me. And, because I had an artificial leg, I had had it
Yeah.
since I was 3 months old.
Hmm.
So I was not into winter sports or anything like that. So I think my father started me on all of that as a compensation. But there were other people also like that. As a matter of fact, my main opponent turned out, my father was always busy. Besides being in the Marine Corps, he was commander of a unit there at the Twin Cities Airport, a unit of engineers. He also had two companies of his own and worked for another company. He was never
Wow.
home. And my mother was always busy with doing all kinds of stuff. So I game with my brother, and uh, I grew up in farm country.
Hmm.
And you're really far away from everyone, and no one's interested in them because they're busy farming. And so my mother convinced my father that we needed to go to where there was a decent high school, so we moved and we joined. I actually started in junior high school, I guess it was, or middle school, junior high school, I think it was, ninth grade. And to our amazement, we found other people that play these games also, war
Hmm.
games, Avalon Hill, all of this. And, we played Horns Rules. You're familiar with them, right?
Yes, I read corns. Hmm.
Yeah. And we played a lot of cards with these guys. And we had no clue that there were other gamers in the Twin Cities. And we were just gaming ourselves. But there was a gaming shop in St. Louis Park, which isn't far from where we were in Minnetonka in Excelsior. And um, we started meeting some of these guys because they would come out to the shop. And now Greg and I have two different stories as to how we ended up in the St. Paul group. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is we ended up there. I think part of it is because we went to the University of Minnesota. And, or maybe it was through the game shop, whatever it was. Um, we were a group of gamers that became amalgamated into the MMSA. And so there was a group of gamers at the University of Minnesota, another at the University of St. Thomas, another at Hamlin University. There are all these gamers there. I mean, you talk about a fertile ground for gaming.
Yeah.
You know, it just a lot of it had to do with winter, I suppose, but also with the fact, and so you have people like Dan Nicholson, but you also have people like Jobs and I always get his name wrong. Woznowski, is it?
Hmm.
Um, and you have guys up in the state of Washington became Microsoft. It just creativity was not created by us. You know, that's a really bad statement, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand what
Um,
you're trying to convey. Yeah.
yeah, it's been around forever, all over,
Hmm.
and not just in the United States, and Canada, and England, and Europe, and China. You have all this creativity all over, and creativity begets creativity. So yeah, we ended up as part of the St. Paul group mostly because of going to the University of Minnesota,
Gotcha.
which was a very convenient place because, you know, St. Paul and Minneapolis are on two sides of the same river, but they also kind of overlap each other because part of Minneapolis is west of the river, but part of it's
Hmm.
east. St. Paul is east of the river, but part of it's west. And the University of Minnesota is east bank and west bank of the Mississippi River. So you have all these people around, and then you have Mike Carr and his group, which were Falcon Heights, that area, which is where the source was located, which became a gathering place for a lot of the gamers. And David ran a lot of his games at the source, comics and games.
Yeah, yeah, I've
Um,
actually heard about that.
Yeah, so the University of Minnesota was a very, very, um, what's the word I want? It was a very good location
Hmm.
because it
It's
was the
fertile ground.
central point
Yeah.
for the Twin Cities. And you had most of these people, if they weren't going to the University of Minnesota, they were going to St. Thomas, they were going to Hamlin, they were going to Gustavus Adolphus, all these colleges. St. Paul has more colleges than any other city except Boston, I think, is the statistic that I read.
That's
So
amazing.
you have all these college kids all just concentrated there. And it didn't take much to communicate between them because, kids would go to the U of M for a couple years and they'd move to St. Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. It didn't take very long to amalgamate.
Sure.
And so, the guys in the Minnetonka group, the one I was talking about in our high school, myself, Greg Svensson, Fred Funk, the Belfry brothers, we all ended up as part of the St. Paul group also.
Okay.
It was a magnet, is what it was. Well, Wesley talks about finding Totten in the U of M library. Um, it's just it was a great field for creativity because we were learning and expanding our minds, and we had the material there to do it. Like they say in real estate, location, location, location.
Right. So, the big question I had regards the Blackmore documentary and some of the things that have come out of that since. So that came out in 2019. Then the last couple of years, we got the Blackmore Foundation's book, which has some pieces from Ken Fletcher in there, and also some of the character sheets with the statistics, like you were talking about.
That's
And
really, to me, I what is nation?
so, Blackmore Foundations is a book from Griffith Morgan, who was putting out some maps and other things from the documents that he's got, and puts them into a gradual expansion of Blackmore from its early days up through um, some later parts of the campaign. Um, it's pretty easy to get a hold of. And there are also some battle reports that are in there, some clips from the corner of the tabletop, um, little newsletter that Arneson did. So it's a pretty neat little bit of history there. So
Oh,
it does have those stats in it. It's got a bunch of the maps. But what I'm also having to deal with and trying to learn some of the information, either from talking with you guys or trying to read these books, is that you can't get access to it in some cases.
and
And
access to what?
we'll get access to documents to look at the primary sources and whatnot. Um, we have to largely wait. Uh,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because, you know, referencing back to what I said that we are just a bunch of kids having fun,
mhm,
there is not much in the way of documentation.
yeah.
And, we were inventing so many games, and some of them worked, some of them didn't, some were discarded, some games became published, in which case then you know about them.
Hmm.
Campaigns that we had, um, we had so many campaigns that in many cases people never bothered to save anything from them.
Hmm.
There were, I guess Arneson took lots of pictures. Beyond that, I'm not aware really of too many people that were actually preserving anything, recording anything.
Hmm.
So, what you need may not exist.
Well, that's how we got to deal with history sometimes. So that's yeah, something I just have to approach. Now, I was told to ask you a particular question about uh, I believe it was Gary Con, December of 2023, um, and something that had happened with you being asked to do some Blackmore content.
Oh, yeah. You know, this may surprise you, but I don't really think much of it to me because the thing is, as you mentioned, I was one of the first Blackmore players. I took over running Blackmore after David passed away. So um, Griffith is kind of much, much later in the game. I believe he started the interviews in 2014.
Hmm.
We had already, you know, we'd been playing for 40 years, and this this is history to you guys, but to us, it's our lives. I
Right.
mean, it's we lived it. So um, I will talk to Jeff occasionally because he's a very knowledgeable guy. He has lots of information, and he has a very straightforward personality. So he knows how to act in lots of situations that I'm unfamiliar with.
Hmm.
So when I talked to Griffith on the phone, I don't even remember who called who, and he we talked about several things, and it just happened to come up in the conversation where he said something about, I should really, I'm not even sure how he worded it, that I should check with him when I do something with Blackmore or whatever. Um, and it didn't even mean anything. It didn't register with me at the time because, as I said, it was part of a conversation.
Right.
It's only after the phone call ended and I thought about it and I thought, what was Griff really saying? And that's when I contacted Jeff and talked to him about it. Now, Jeff has had a lot more experience in, um, how should I put it, the actual workings of what happens with companies and individuals in gaming,
Hmm.
and conventions and that kind of thing, where he's had a lot of bad experience also. And so he is always on the alert for what could go wrong, what people mean, things like that, which is part of the reason I contacted him because I brought it up with him that, Griffith is saying something about I should, I guess, coordinate with him if I do something like this at the convention. And I was wondering, where is he coming from? Why would he say something like that to me? And that's when Jeff explained to me what Griffith had been doing all this time. It had been like 9 years since he first showed up with us, and um, the documentary was released 4 years earlier.
Hmm.
And so he told me a lot of the things that I was unaware of, which seems to be a common theme. I'm really oblivious to a lot of stuff that goes on and what people are doing, things that happen. And, he informed me about all the things that were going on with like Griffith filing for a trademark for Blackmore or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, as far as I know, there's no problem with my running Blackmore games because this is something that people do at conventions, and I started thinking, well, maybe what Griff was getting at was if I start getting into more than just running games, if I release a book or whatever. I don't know. And this is speculation on my part.
Okay.
And, so it never really occurred to me that this was a big deal. Now, Jeff makes a big deal out of a lot of things because he's had so much dealing with it. And this was just one more thing along the path of what Griffith had been doing. And Jeff was, shall we say, very skeptical of a lot of what he was doing. But it wasn't just Griffith. It was this guy running Dave Con. It was this guy running the so-called museum down in Lake Geneva.
Hmm.
And these guys like contact each other. They have dealings with each other. And Jeff thought this might have something to do with that. And I didn't know, and I really don't care one way or the other.
Okay.
The main thing for me was that in talking to Jeff, I got the idea that Griffith is doing a lot of stuff which is not necessarily legal. So my running games at a convention would not even fall within that sphere at all, which was what I wanted. And,
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
talked to Jeff. So I'm not sure exactly what Griffith was angling for because, we've Griffith and I have been in contact very irregularly. And I'm like that with everyone. I don't really talk to the guys and anymore at all. And Jeff, Martin Natzel, Kent Eilers, of course, Gaylord,
Yeah.
and that's about it. Occasionally, I'd run into guys like a Gary Kahn. I saw Ross Maker. I saw David Wesley, and talked to them briefly. But beyond that, I don't really keep up with people at all, or what's going on, or even just call to say hello.
Hmm.
Really terrible that way. So Griff and I had been in contact very, very irregularly. Mostly what I learned about what was going on was because Jeff filled me in
Hmm.
on all of that. And so it just was something that I guess I did not take seriously, would be the way to put it, because it didn't seem to be relevant to me. So,
Right, because you're just gonna run a game.
yeah, well, I ran a lot of games, which brings up some points. Actually, if I could ask you some questions, if that's okay.
Oh no, please shoot.
One is, I believe Jeff mentioned that you had met me before. Could you remind me? Because my memory is terrible and I've met so many people that are all strangers to me. I don't remember you.
Oh, no, we have not met before.
Oh,
I ran a Kickstarter last July to basically fund the research for the book that I'm finishing up. Vic Dorso had invited me to DaveCon. I flew out and was there. Vic then introduced me to Jeff, and that was really my first meeting of anybody from the Twin Cities, because I'm from the middle of nowhere in Indiana.
uh-huh.
But
Yeah, oh,
mhm,
okay. So we hadn't actually, so it's just my memory. It's that we actually have not ever met.
correct.
I do have other questions.
Hmm.
Who all have you talked to besides Jeff and me? I guess Bill Hoyt and maybe Ken Fletcher were there at the time. Did you talk to them at all?
Yeah, that's correct. I was speaking with Bill Hoyt, and then Jeff came in, and then Ken Fletcher came in, and we were just chatting about you guys and your wargaming going on in the Twin Cities, and just about how you guys did things. Then I got to speak with Dave Wesley a fair bit, kind of late on one of the evenings. And my goal was to just kind of flit around, talk with everybody as I could, and also record what I could, just to put it up so people could listen to how you guys did everything back in the day. I also spoke for a fairly long time with Ken Shepro, and it was about the wargaming and also about his event there, which was a battle during the War of 1812 taking place in 1814, right up before the burning of the White House. So I had gone there
The Battle
large,
of Bladensburg?
uh-huh, and then he showed me some really cool printouts that he had to.
Who's
Uh,
doing this? Wesley?
so that was Shepro, because
Yeah.
he wanted to run that, and I was able to at least peek in and see them having a good time with it because they got their forces, their map on the butcher paper and everything, and it looked like a rather good time.
Yeah, the reason I was asking about that is because Wesley likes to pull surprises on people.
Hmm.
And one of the surprises was, of course, Brownstein. He didn't tell people that what he was actually going to do when he told them that he was going to be running a game. He told them it was set in a village in Austria, I believe, and so everyone assumed this was going to be a battle they were going to fight in the Napoleonic campaign, and
Hmm.
then it turned out it was Brownstein. Well, he did that also with something else. one of the best games, at least one of the most memorable games for me, was the Battle of Bladensburg. He had announced that he would be running a miniatures battle,
Hmm.
and as each of us showed up, we were assigned or given a choice, I do not remember, of what we wanted to be in the battle. And maybe we were given a choice because, as I said, I'm a naval enthusiast. So when I found out that this is a battle in the War of 1812, and in the battle, the Americans had a contingent of Marines and sailors led
Hmm.
by a ship captain. So I immediately took that. And one of the surprises in the battle was we learned that we could not talk to each other unless we were actually adjacent to each other on the battlefield.
That's cool.
Yeah, because Wesley was real big on fog of war.
Hmm.
I don't know if he got that from Taunton or what.
That's part of it.
Um,
Yeah, those old games for training officers, they emphasize that quite a bit. And I want to try that myself this year.
yeah, it was one of the most memorable battles I was ever in because uh, the coordination was so poor between us
Hmm.
that it made for a lot of fun. A lot of interesting things happened, and there were conflicting orders because one guy was the Secretary of War, another was, I think, the president showed up. Another was a some other cabinet member. Then we had the commanding officer of the American Armed Forces,
Hmm.
and they were running around giving orders to people, and they were not coordinating with each other because they weren't together on the battlefield. So I received three different orders that all conflicted with each other. Um, they were consecutive. They weren't all at the same time.
Hmm.
So, like I started the battle set up on some heights across, well, overlooking this, I guess, a river, more likely a stream.
Yeah, there'd be
That
mainly a bridge you'd be looking at because the English crossed that.
no, this was
Oh.
further up
Hmm.
the stream. As it turns out, what I was overlooking was a ford, and it was a great location,
Hmm.
a wonderful place. But one of these guys that was playing a commander of some kind showed up. Now, I had coordinated with one of the other players who was running a cavalry unit,
Hmm.
and we thought that we could work well together. I would keep the British from crossing the river. If they did cross, then the cavalry commander would charge them. And then, so he went away physically on the map and physically in the game and to set up his units. And then someone showed up and told me, no, you're in the wrong location. We need you down in the town overlooking the bridge. And I wasn't allowed to let the cavalry commander know. I don't know whatever happened to him in the battle. So I packed, and I had artillery pieces, some of them pretty big,
Hmm.
from these ships. And so it took me quite a while to pack up and move down into the town and set up there. And then someone else came along and gave me an order about, well, yeah, but I need some of your guys to go over here. And, it just, and this, I probably did better than most. There were guys who were receiving orders to go here, then go there, then go over there, then attack, no, defend. You know, typical battle from the 1800s. And when you think about it, actually, this is typical for all battles that are fought. So
Yes,
I did
confusion.
quite well, actually, because Fred Funk, I, yeah, can you close the door to the bedroom? All right. My wife's taking a nap. Okay, so anyway, Fred Funk, who I had known since high school, he was one of the first gamers I met after my brother. He was an extreme what's the term? Anglophile.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
really
he
much in
loved
English history.
everything. Yeah, he loved everything about the British. So of course he was the British commander.
Hmm.
And so yeah, he charged across the bridge, and they found the ford and charged across the ford. And actually, these battles, when you introduce things like morale and fog of war,
Hmm.
they go amazingly like they did historically. Basically, we got our butt kicked. Not me personally, because I did a great job in repelling the British
Hmm.
for as long as I could, but I was isolated. I had no other units near me, so yeah, it was lots and lots of fun. And so when you mentioned Battle Bladensburg with Ken Shepero, by the way, the name is very familiar to me, but as I've said, my memory is so bad now.
Hmm.
I don't remember Ken. I don't even remember if I ever met him. I should show up at one of these conventions that he's at so I can talk to him.
Yeah, that'd be
Uh,
great. I'm actually going to be going back to DaveCon next year to play more games and chat with people.
Another question I had was,
Hmm.
now, how long have you had in mind this book that you want to write?
Uh, just about 18 months. So I decided to go in on the topic because we call it D&D YouTube. They like to read documents out of context and then take it to terrible places.
You must
Then
be talking about the guy that wrote that book, John Peterson.
that's correct. So it's part of related to what he wrote in 2024 because what I'm writing is always a response to that. Because you've got people writing these history books who don't actually care about writing history. They don't care about what the context of the time was, how people would be back at that stage. All they think about is themselves in this time period, and they try to put themselves back in the past. It does not work like that.
Now,
And then,
why did you get, first of all, why did you realize that there was something wrong with what John had done? And why did you feel the need then? Well, for that matter, um, why did you think that what John had done was wrong? I mean, there was a period of time when Blackmoor and Arneson, the whole Twin Cities group, were unacknowledged.
mhm,
As a matter of fact, there was a whole cadre of people who thought that Gary Gygax was the be all and end all, and we were a bunch of frauds up here in the Twin Cities. And it's
mhm.
only recently that anyone has done any work at all to try to dispel that. And I'm wondering where you came up with the idea that there's more to it than Gygax and D&D.
Oh, sure. That's actually very easy. So because I'm a latecomer to this stuff, people have within my friendship circle talked about the Blackmore documentary. So I watched that and gave a lot more detail about what led to the game. So then I look up stuff like Dave Arneson's 1977 first campaign book he did with Judges Guild, and
Mm-hmm.
then the other games that went into kind of creating the hobby from there. Some of it is just working backwards on my own. A fair amount of it is guys telling me that in these issues of these magazines, they've got certain interviews, and these are relevant. And
Did you check out any forums?
yes, Dragon's Foot's been pretty useful along with some other ones. Luckily, they've been archived for the most part. But the issue is, in some cases, you just have to know that it's there. So that's another one of these opacities you have to deal with. But I've also got the Making of OD&D book that they put out for the 50th anniversary, and
Oh, good
also
stuff.
Wizards of the Coast did, and in the first few pages, John Peterson and Jason Tondro try to rake Gygax and Arneson over the coals for including things like slavery in a historical style game, and then also just having things like race or there's not special rules for women in it, just these very silly modern issues that have nothing to do with people having fun back in the 70s in the Twin Cities and Lake Geneva, But there's also the absurdity of trying to say that people in the Middle Ages, medieval times, should have the kind of liberties we only realized, as an outbreak or an outgrowth of the English Civil War, reading Cicero, the American Revolution, things that we're still debating all the way up to today. So it's
In
just
other words, the woke culture, and this is something that
that's
I've become aware of also because
yeah.
Jeff has run into this quite a bit, especially with his daughters. And
Yes, yes, he's told me a bit
um,
about that.
it's part of the reason, probably, I don't know if you know, I've retired from gaming.
Hmm.
And part of the reason is because I'm kind of leery of what's going on with, the internet is a real easy place for quacks, for disgruntled people
Correct.
to voice their opinions and to find other people that share those opinions.
Hmm.
And so, as for myself, I was badly bullied as a kid.
Hmm.
So I basically have an attitude of whatever you think of me, fine, that's you. I could care less. But I worry about the effect it'll have on my family and friends. And part of
Hmm.
the reason why I retired was because I don't want to navigate those waters.
Yeah, it's a lot of nonsense. And while I'm not specifically writing it as an anti-woke thing, because in my opinion that just gives up one master for another, I'm also taking each of these claims to task to where, it's ridiculous to try to have somebody in, say, 1974 exhibit values from 50 years in the future, because in ethics we call that supererogation. You're going above and beyond the call of duty, and it's ridiculous to expect that from somebody. Because that,
Yeah,
so that's just part of it. Um, a fair amount is trying to get the story right with a pretty good timeline along with that. Then talk about what you went through, what the other guys went through, how you guys gamed, and then I'm hoping that can also inform anybody who reads it about, what they could do with their own games, their own clubs, to then try something else. Because when we've been talking, you're going over your creativity, trying something new, and if something doesn't work, as in the case of the chainmail test with the troll, you change things up, which is what Arneson always did, and because of that, somebody else can try something else because, you're not going to be held fast to these things. And if a rule set doesn't work out, you may as well just try something else. Um,
yeah. Well, it's not like we dropped the rule. It's just that we just ignored it from then on.
right. Yeah, because my
And
understanding is
yeah,
eventually there's like a bunch of hit points and hit locations involved in Blackmoor when it comes to the rules.
uh-huh.
So you do those kinds of modifications and it works for the group. Um, and that's perfectly fine for that group. There's no reason to try to go after somebody. But it
They
is,
come up with reasons.
well,
Well, they don't even
it's
need a reason. Like
correct.
disgruntled with life. Uh, Maybe someone has bullied them. Maybe they
Hmm.
see something that they think is wrong and they need to right it. And you know, so it really doesn't take much of anything. And quite often, it really has nothing to do with whatever the topic is that they're attacking.
Yeah.
It's just something that they can do. It's amazing the things that people will do just because they can, and the internet is infamous for that.
Yeah, that's correct. And then in the case of D&D and role-playing games, we're going to take Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax's names, rake them through the mud while still selling all of their materials online, but with a little disclaimer on front just to make us feel better about ourselves. I've
Well,
actually shown my
remember,
kid. Sorry.
companies um, are not there for the customers. They're not there for the society. Companies are there for the money.
Hmm.
And so It's a what's the word I want? A precaution that they do because they want the maximum amount of money to come in for
Mm-hmm.
the company to expand. And so that's why you see things like disclaimers like that in there, because these companies could care less. And I'm sure that the disclaimers have nothing to do with their conscience or anything like that.
Yeah.
The only reason they do that is because that way then they don't have a bunch of people going after them and causing the company trouble, because most companies are public, which means shareholders, and shareholders can be freaked out very easily.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's society um, is very complicated, as you are well aware, and people just try to navigate their way through it, and so there are a lot of people. Well, kids, gangs. You have kids that go out and cause trouble just because they can.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happens on the internet. People will go out there and cause trouble just because they can. And it's all the better for them if they see that there are results to it. Even though it's destructive,
Mm-hmm.
they like that because they've accomplished something,
Right. They
no
get what
matter
they
how
want.
bad it might be.
Right.
And that's why that kind of freaked me out, the fact that there are people out there like that kind of thing. And Jeff described to me what was going on, and I thought, well, geez, I'm an easy target because again, back then we were doing all this stuff, and there were slaves and everything. I mean, the one guy, that I can never remember his name, who decided he wanted to be Marfeld the Barbarian and went around killing and destroying and all of that stuff. It was done for fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he was making a statement. It's not like he was exhibiting part of his personality. It was done for fun.
Make believe in a
And
game. Who would have thought?
yeah, yeah, exactly. But that happened. We were
Yeah.
there. There were slaves. Women were not really thought of in the game, mostly because 99% of the gamers were guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be an easy target for all of that. When I started running the games, uh, different, how do I put it? Blackmoor style
Mm-hmm.
is what I ran. I ran a Blackmoor campaign because I used a Blackmoor setting,
Sure.
but I put it in a different age. So that way that gave me freedom to do things differently than what we did in the past. And Arneson was not the only game master from back then.
Mm-hmm.
There are other guys that ran games. I ran games back in the day also. But we all ran it in the same vein kind of thing. And I wanted to get away from some of the things that we were doing back then.
Sure.
Like my character, Robert the Bald, was a wizard. But funny enough, ironically, I do not like magic.
Mm-hmm.
I've never cared for it. It's just that we all had stables of characters, and sometimes characters just took off. Wizards were not all that common in our games back then, but we learned real early if we showed up for a game and everyone had a fighting man, that was unbalanced. We needed a wizard,
Mm-hmm.
a cleric, and that kind of. And so I would always volunteer. Okay, fine, I'll start up a wizard. And it just happened that that character just really took off. Well, I was not real happy about. I preferred my fighting men that I had. As a matter of fact, I started another character after David retired, my wizard, and I had much more fun with him. He was a half elf, so I could be a fighting man
Yeah.
in addition to the wizard and cleric and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I didn't care for magic, so when I started up, I came up with an idea that I thought would mollify people because I didn't want magic in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea was this thing about everyone had a special ability or characteristic or whatever.
Okay.
And that way, then, because some people could turn invisible, which in itself is a type of magic kind of thing. But I came up with these things to get away from what happened before. And I was not really aware of any of the problems that people were having with what we did back in the day back then. 2019, it still was, well, maybe it had already started, but I was completely unaware of it. I was just doing things different. And it seemed to click with everyone because we were doing Blackmoor. We had the Blackmoor setting. We were doing the same things we did in Blackmoor. I was not, as I put it, burdening people with a set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
You just played it, and but as time went by, I became aware of the fact that people were causing problems. That's kind of a blunt and inexact way to put it, but let's just say that um, I was an easy target if anyone wanted to go after me.
Sure, sure.
And yeah, but like you said, there were reasons why we did the things we did. Women weren't in the game because women didn't play the game.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, back then, when we were gaming back in the 70s, we were, I guess, a little ashamed of being gamers. If someone asked us what we did,
Correct.
we would tell them, oh, well, I work at parking lots, and we wouldn't actually bring up the fact that we gamed because this had as a matter of fact, I am convinced, and probably other people also, part of the reason why D&D caught on like it did was because of the controversy of the magic, the wizards. I don't know where people came up with the idea we had witches in the game, but they accused us of having witches, and then a couple kids who had, well, I'll be blunt in saying mental problems, they had difficulties, who ended up paying for it, who happened to play D&D. And so there was this huge controversy, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when Dungeons and Dragons really took off.
Yeah, that's actually what I say in my book. It's the Egbert case where the kid goes missing in the steam tunnels that
Yeah.
actually has the game really take off because you've got international attention. People want the books because it's supposed to be crazy, and then they get a special publishing deal the next year, and that's when it just goes nuts.
And
Yeah.
more importantly, it comes to the attention of people who had not realized that it was out there.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Mm-hmm.
publishing in the gaming business back then was very much, I mean, I've often said that uh, the gaming industry is not really an industry. It's a whole bunch of amateurs who try to run companies and usually fail miserably.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a joke from the restaurant industry that I use for gaming industry, and that is, if you want $1 million in the gaming industry, you have to start with 2 million.
That's pretty good.
That's about it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. When I found out how TSR operated and how they publish, I was aghast. I mean, it never would. It was a clever way of doing it that Gygax came up with. That a company would actually take these games that he produced and market them, and they would just buy everything that he had. That's why TSR had all that money. Otherwise, they wouldn't have anything. Even back then, it was very, very clever, but I was aghast that it actually worked as long as it did until finally the company decided, well, we have all these games piling up in the warehouse. We want to return them and we want our money back.
Yeah, because
And
it's
I guess you eventually end up paying the piper kind of
mhm.
thing. But it was very much a group of amateurs, people who we were not respected at all.
Mhm.
I think was part of this big controversy with D&D, the fact that gamers, I mean, we're considered like jesters were considered back in the Middle Ages, not to be taken serious,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But now that it's gotten out there, a lot of people are aware that, hey, there's this game out there that you can pretend like you're a wizard or a knight in shining armor or a damsel in distress kind of thing. And, it's serendipitous, is what it is.
Oh yeah, luck
And
is always a factor.
yeah, but my whole point was we didn't advertise that we were gamers back then.
Hmm.
It's only much, much later that and there still is kind of this taint to being a gamer when it comes down to it. Everyone has this image of gamers as either being these kids that were spending their allowance or these guys that were still kids, even though they're in their 20s or 30s, living in the parents' basement. They're overweight, they have scraggly hair,
Right.
and the whole thing. It all surprises them when they see, although I have to say that there are gamers that do fulfill that role. But it surprises them that there are people who, like Dan Nicholson I mean, he started a computer company
Yeah.
back before, I mean, when computer companies were just forming. So yeah, there's a whole history there, and yeah, I had heard because people had hammered me about the fact that John Peterson believed in documents, and that documents don't tell the whole story. So yeah, I've been hearing that for years now, and the fact that you're saying it also is no surprise to me, and I agree with that. Because like I said, this may be history to people, but it's our life.
Right.
This is what we live. So I know all the stories. I Jeff likes to say he knows where the skeletons in the closet are,
Yeah.
and and yeah, I've had problems with gamers in the past, and there are people. My best friend that came out of that. Actually, I have a couple of best friends that came out of that, but part of it too is the fact that as part of our life at our age, we've lost so many of them.
Right.
It
Right.
started even 2019. Every year since then, someone's passed away. But people passed away before then. Who's ever heard of Dale Nelson? He was one of us. He was one of the original gamers in the MMSA, and no one's ever heard of him. He was a great guy. He was married. He had a job at the armory up here when that existed. He was. I mean, I think he was ex-military because he had a buzz cut. He dressed nice and the whole
Hmm.
thing. And but no one's ever heard of him because he passed away so young.
Yeah. Now, Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've got to be getting on to work now.
Okay,
So thank you so much for talking to me. I think I got a lot of guys who are going to be interested in what you've got to say. So,
let me mention some names though of
yeah.
people you should talk to: Gail Gaylord,
Hmm.
David McGarry, uh, Ross Maker, um, Mike Carr,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, Greg Svensson. Greg Svensson's still active on the internet. All these people have their own takes on all of this
Right.
kind of thing. So you definitely should talk to them before you publish. Now, what you decide or not is up to you. I mean, you may have exactly the material you need for what you want, but I would highly recommend John Snyder also. John Snyder
Yeah.
especially. Um, I would recommend talking to all these people. You stepped into a quagmire. There's so much to talk about. I warned someone that interviewed me at the convention, a couple women for the podcast, that I told them, well, they asked who else to talk to, and I told them, you're asking a bunch of old men to talk. We're going to talk your ears off. So, but thank you for calling.
Yeah, it's
And
been a lot of fun.
if you have any more questions or want to say anything or just talk to me, by all means, feel free to call me.
All right, sure. Wonderful. Thank you. You have a good day now.
You too. Bye.
Goodbye.